Good evening, muy buenas tardes, buenas noches. My name is Alessandra Russo, and I'm the chair of the Department of Latin American and Iberian Cultures. And I feel very, very honored to participate in this event and to be moderating the panel, which already looks fabulous. I have the great honor of working with Ana daily, and so I just want to remember how several years ago now, I still remember when we first met with Ana and how I was immediately impressed by the clarity of the thesis of the book that today we see as magnificently published. And so I now truly look forward to the discussion of her analysis of how capitalism and social imaginaries intertwined in Spain between 1950 and 1967, and how we can precisely locate these intertwinings in the astonishing archive of creative cultural artifacts that Ana analyzes with finesse, mastery, but also humor, as it is evinced by the cover of the book. So my role is to present the speakers and then to moderate the discussion. So let me introduce my colleagues tonight. First, the author. Ana Fernández-Cebrián is an assistant professor of modern Iberian studies at Columbia University. Her research focuses on the historical shifts pertaining to ideological production and the transformation of the public sphere in modern and contemporary Spain, with a special emphasis on literature, cultural studies, film, and media. She earned her BA in Hispanic Philology from Universidad de Zaragoza in Spain and her PhD in Spanish and Portuguese from Princeton University. Fables of Development, Capitalism and Social Imaginaries in Spain, 1950-1967, although now I know that there is even another part which is, it's up to 1975, right? That is perhaps forthcoming in the translation of the book in Spanish, is her first book. Her second book, project, tentatively entitled Land and Water, Literature of the Commons in Modern and Contemporary Spain, will study the relationship between nature, political and literary imagination, and communitarian experiences. So, thanks, Ana. Bruno Bostels is the acting Dean of Humanities, Jesse and George Siegel Professor in the Humanities, and Professor in the Department of Latin American and Iberian Cultures with a joint appointment in the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society. He returned actually to Columbia in 2016 after having taught for 13 years at Cornell University, for 3 years at Columbia, and for 6 years at Harvard University. His research covers a wide range of topics in literature, culture, and politics in modern Latin America, as well as contemporary philosophy and political theory. He's the author of an impressive number of books, among which many devoted to the French philosopher Alain Badiou, which he also extensively translated into English, and of many other books, among which Marx and Freud in Latin America, The Actuality of Communism, and most recently, La Comuna Mexicana y qué es la Antifilosofía. His books are widely translated into Spanish, German, and even Korean. Yes. Pablo Picato is a professor and chair of the Department of History at Columbia University. His research and teaching focus on modern Mexico, particularly on crime, politics, and culture. He has taught as visiting faculty at universities in Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, and France, and has been director of Columbia's Institute of Latin American Studies and university senator. His books include City of Suspects, Crime in Mexico City, The Tyranny of Opinion, Honor in the Construction of the Mexican Public Sphere, A History of Infamy, Crime, Truth, and Justice in Mexico, and most recently, Historia Mínima de la Violencia en México. And Benita San Pedro Vizcaya is a professor of Spanish colonial studies in the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures at Hofstra University. Her research engages academically and politically with Spanish colonial past and present, archives and legacies, both in North and Sub-Saharan Africa and in Latin America and the Caribbean. She's invested in the study of colonial links within and beyond the frame of the multiple Spanish imperial Atlantic and global networks, and she has published extensively on the politics and processes of decolonization, colonial health and biopolitics, colonial domestic labor, colonial carceral systems, and on the ruins of late colonial modernity. She's the author of very important books, among which Border Interrogations, Questioning Spanish Frontiers, Rerouting Galician Studies, Multidisciplinary Interventions, and has 2 forthcoming monographs, Caribbean Deportee Narratives and African Presidios, and Racismo Científico y Prácticas Biopolíticas, el Proyecto Colonial Español en África como Laboratorio de Experimentación bajo el franquismo. So thank you very much for joining the panel, and please join me in welcoming our guest tonight. So I will, we will follow the program that the Society of Fellows, which actually I want to thank tonight, the Society of Fellows and the Hyman Center for the Humanities and the Division of the Humanities for organizing and supporting this wonderful series of celebrations of books by the faculty at Columbia. So Ana, thank you very much for starting.
Well, thank you very much, Alessandra, for your presentation. Sorry, I'm very moved today, so I'm going to read my notes because I don't want to forget anything. I am deeply grateful for this celebration of my book. First of all, I would like to thank the speakers for their presence and thank all of you for coming out today. I feel very fortunate for the support provided by the Latin American and Iberian Cultures Department and the Hyman Center for the Humanities. It also gives me great joy to express my gratitude to so many colleagues, students, and friends for having been able during these years to share conversation about the content of this book as well as the writing process. The idea of development came back to me again months ago while reading several texts about the 50th anniversary of the military coup in Chile. Chilean and Spanish dictatorships exercised sovereign power that created a new process of capital accumulation and a new economic model that it would be fair to label as Catholic neoliberalism, according to historian Bethany Moreton. A particular synthesis between the expansion of a spiritualized capitalism and a neoliberal economic thought, alien to any social doctrine of the Catholic Church. In this sense, the so-called Spanish economic miracle allowed for experimentation with new economic policies and the social imaginaries associated with them in the scenario of an already consolidated dictatorship. Chilean scholar Martín Arboleda recently proposed reopening the archives of development and rethinking the alternative policies that the economists of the Popular Unity Coalition were advocating for in Chile. As the economic agenda of the Popular Unity shows us, the idea of development has also embodied long-standing popular aspirations for well-being, progress, and economic sovereignty, and therefore for economic freedom. In the case of my book, my intention was to go farther back and recover the cultural archives of the transition between autarchy to developmentalism in Spain, considered as the founding moment of a process of accumulation by dispossession. In a context of economic, social, and ecological crisis, such as the current one, the analysis I propose about the cultural logics that organized the circulation and distribution of capital during the Francoist dictatorship invites us to continue questioning the impact of the fables of development on the constructions of the collective fantasies that shaped the Spanish socioeconomic model. As you can read in this quote, as the inhabitants of the village of Sástago stated in 1973 in a poster hanging in the church of their town with the message, they call development a miracle, but the miracle isn't the distribution. Other alternatives regarding the distribution of wealth and resources are possible. The idea of development can be mobilized as an emancipatory ideal for democratic struggles. My interest in this transition between autarchy and technocratic capitalism started when I saw two photographs that I found in the early stages of my research, and that made me change my object of study completely. These two photographs. One of them was the front page of the Falangist newspaper Imperio on January 1951. Next to a speech in which the achievements of the regime in a year that the dictator described as the most fruitful of his mandate were described, a news item appeared with a surprising headline: "Atomic bombs aboard flying saucers." The other image was this image featured on the cover of my book. During the Christmas of 1961, the children of La Salle Bonanova, a school in Barcelona, posed in front of a rocket-shaped artifact containing a figure of the Christ child. The image combined the celebration of the Christian Epiphany with the desire for modernity harbored by the space race. One of the children photographed was the poet, composer, and painter Pepe Sales, a victim of the HIV epidemic of the 1990s. Sales swelled the ranks of the countercultural youth in the political transition to democracy. The first years of life of this generation, the generation of my parents, took place in the long journey stretching from the end of the so-called hunger years to the 1970s, when many of these youngsters participated in emancipation projects against the dictatorship that sought to transform the world and change their own lives. If, as Walter Benjamin stated, each epoch dreams the next, the analysis of the fantasies that were parts of the lives of the generations that preceded ours can help us understand it, not only what their ideas about the Spanish economic miracle were, but also to preserve the memory of what their wishes were about the distribution of that miracle. Developmentalism in Franco's Spain was built in the complex dialectic between the sovereign power of the dictator, understood as a theological political power, and the emergence of an authoritarian technocratic regime in which new modes of governance promoted and ordered emerging forms of life. The collective fictions that I have called Fables of Development mediate at the crossroads between national Catholic ideology, economic liberalism, and the political theology of Franco dictatorship. These fables originate from a reflection by Jacques Derrida, in which he demands a careful analysis of the social fantasies that sustain capitalism. Quote, "No capital without an accredited fable." No hay capital sin una fábula acreditada. The fables of development examined in this book are characterized by the recreation of a providential content that modernity often denies. Thus, in the wake of recent debates about the theological and enchanting implications of capitalism, I focus on a basic paradox. Why was the so-called Spanish economic miracle, supposedly a secular, rational, and technocratic process, portrayed through narratives in which providential, supernatural, or extraordinary elements were often involved? To answer this question, I examine the cultural fictions and collective social life in the 1950s and 1960s, when Spain moved from autarchy to the project of industrial and tourist development. As this book examines, many cultural producers challenge the narratives about the economic miracle and the circulation and distribution of capital promoted by the Francoist regime. Writers, filmmakers, and cartoonists who reflected on the situation of the country in the Cold War and who imagine a life in outer space more just and supportive, as well as creator who invented fictions that were critical of the spectacle of gambling or against the privileges of those who exercise charity, gave new meanings to ideas about development and the distribution of wealth. A careful analysis of cultural productions reveals the deep complexity of the uneven development of the economic, political, and ideological instances of Spanish society at that historical juncture. In this sense, the providential narratives that characterize the fables of development in the cultural production of this period express these contradictions through the incorporation of supernatural, transcendent, or extraordinary elements in the imaginaries of economic modernization, which progressively displace the ideological scheme of the autarchy period. I hope this book had shed some light on the lives and voices that in times of dictatorship imagine a present and future that includes us, as well as on our own possibilities of imagining other potential futures. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana. Bruno? Yes.
What do flying saucers or UFOs, baby Jesus, and the lottery have in common? At first sight, nothing relates these disparate ideas and realities other than the chance encounter that seems arbitrarily to throw them together in a single sentence. In her book, Fables of Development, Ana Fernández-Cebrián shows how intricately related these things are upon closer inspection and how the threat or promise of extraterrestrial invasions, the providential narratives of divine intervention, and the fantasy of hitting the big jackpot were instrumental in forging the transition under General Franco's regime from dictatorial autarchy and isolationism to Spain's incorporation into the European and world market based on the liberalization of the economy, industrial development, and tourism. Fables of Development looks at this transition through the lens of the social imaginaries and fantasies that do not just accompany or illustrate these social changes, but actively give them meaning and structure them. As such, the book offers us a model of literary and cultural critique as a material analysis of what I like to call forms of the real, or what Frederick Jameson calls the poetics of social forms. What interests Ana are the collective fictions about fate, chance, luck, providence, choice, development, technology, progress, and so on, that shape the self-understanding of the peoples of Spain during this pivotal moment for the Franco regime in the 1950s and 1960s. Gambling with chance, providential interventions, space invasions, or charity as a substitute for an absent welfare state, from this vantage point serve as organizing principles for the production of meaning. They are not just fictional or ideological reflections of a social reality that would be available outside of them. Instead, they are formative of the real itself and give it its miraculous tinge. This may seem paradoxical insofar as capitalist developments and economic market forces are supposed to proceed on their own strictly secular, technocratic, or this-worldly grounds, with no need for resorting to providential, supernatural, or otherwise extraordinary explanations. And yet, Ana shows how intricately connected capitalism and religion truly are, with Francoist Spain being the testing ground for a hypothesis and a methodology that could be expanded and confirmed both for other regions and across longer time periods. In terms of geographical expansion, it would be interesting to compare the Spanish miracle to other cases. For example, the West German economic miracle of the immediate post-war, or the Mexican miracle of the 1940s and 70s, or the Chilean miracle, which Ana just referenced, of the late 1970s and early 80s, led by the Chicago boys of the Thomas Friedman School. This language of the miraculous, of salvation by providential or divine ways, is no mere coincidence. It is symptomatic of a deep entanglement between capitalism and Christianity, not just in its Protestant version, so crucial for the moment of primitive or originary accumulation at the bloody origins of capitalism, but also in its uniquely Spanish version as national Catholicism, emblematized in the role of the lay Catholic order of Opus Dei in Franco's reshuffled cabinet. As for the historic expansion of the time frame of this interpretation, it would be interesting to delve deeper in the Christian origins of capitalism, perhaps along the lines of the work of the Argentine philosopher Leon Rotisner, who in a book on St. Augustine, titled La Cosa y la Cruz, The Thing and the Cross, proposes the highly provocative thesis, which goes well beyond Max Weber's idea of the spirit of Protestantism and the capitalist work ethic, that without the production of a faithful Christian subject, modeled on the life of a Christian saint who also became an obedient citizen of the Roman Empire, and today, of course, again, the model for contemporary civilization and Lidhama here at Columbia, capitalism simply would not have been able to take flight. In Ana's words, borrowing an expression from Jameson, the divine work of Opus Dei serves as a necessary vanishing mediator in this process, just as Protestantism did between feudalism and capitalism, between medieval corporatism and capitalist individualism. Ana's argument, however, works not from history or sociology, but from the cultural expressions of this new social imaginary. Thus, her objects of studies are not just political speeches or sociological statistics, but novels, movies, poems, newspaper articles and advertisements, radio programs, and comics. Through a close reading of the poetics of these cultural forms as social forms, or as forms of the real, without which the new realities created under the providential eye of the economic miracle would not be meaningful, she is able to shed new light on how the citizens of Francoist Spain lived through this period of transition and rapid, if also uneven, development. While the use of science fiction or the threat of extraterrestrial invasions to map the imaginary coordinates of the Cold War as a global conflict between a communist or an Americanist other may follow a pattern that is familiar to many of us in different settings, I am especially intrigued by Ana's investigations into games of chance with lotteries, raffles, or other forms of gambling. Chance is, of course, a value frequently associated with progress and modernity. Think, for example, of Stephen Greenblatt's crossover book, The Swerve, on the rediscovery during the Italian Renaissance of the ancient atomism of Lucretius, based on the aleatory clinamen or swerve of atoms, that instead of falling like parallel raindrops in the void, suddenly swerve and deviate from their course and collide to form a world. The contingency of such a deviation or encounter, despite its origins in Roman antiquity, is what supposedly defines the freedom of the modern individual as a subject capable of choosing his or her own destiny instead of relying on the dogmatic fate of one's predestined station in the cosmos or within a divinely created order. Now, during the economic takeoff of liberalism in Francoist Spain, the role of chance once again plays a similar role of subjective reformatting of the population, whiplashed by the processes of rapid industrialization, real estate construction, and self-exoticization for the purposes of global tourism. In this sense, via a fascinating yet little-known text from the Italian communist Antonio Gramsci, Ana reminds us that Marx's famous use of the phrase opium of the people to define the role of religion under capitalism may well have its source in a novel by Honoré de Balzac, in which the lottery is defined as an opium of poverty. For Ana, the representation of the circulation and distribution of money through games of chance helps to install a new regime of contingent market forces with its own horizon of expectations, independent of the maligned collectivism or interventionism of a welfare state. Through a wealth of examples, from the fantasies of science fiction that oscillate between the nostalgia for past greatness, Make Spain Great Again, and the future regeneration of this lost ideal in a fully reconciled society beyond the class struggle, to the illusionary dream worlds promised by the random purchase of a lottery ticket, we come to understand how cultural artifacts and social imaginaries serve to construct something like an image of the total social fact, or what Ana also calls a complete social ontology. And in the case of the role of numerous lotteries or raffles and draws of all kinds, what she calls a social ontology of chance. Today, when we are once again obsessed with UFOs, when billionaires fantasize with the conquest of outer space as part of a form of extraterrestrial capitalism, when presidential candidates from the USA to Argentina portray themselves as the divinely chosen agents for the providential return of the nation's lost greatness, when college students gamble their scarce resources away on the outcome of March Madness, and only a solar eclipse, even a partial one, brings out more students to the steps of Law Library than any protest. Ana is right to insist that Francoist Spain, long before the official onset of neoliberalism under Thatcher and Reagan, served as, and I quote, a laboratory that allowed for experimentation with new economic policies and the fantasies associated with them in the scenario of a dictatorship. In this sense, Fables of Development serves as a powerful reminder, if ever we needed one, of the crucial role of literary and cultural analysis for our present. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. Pablo.
Thank you very much. I am going to also talk about the book, and I might repeat some of the things that Bruno was saying, because I really appreciate the way in which Ana is bringing together different cultural artifacts and makes sense of, UFOs, comic books, science fiction, through a variety of media, magazines, radio, movies, novels. And they come together because they show the transformation of capitalism under the Franco dictatorship, how that transformation was perceived, but also how those explanations shape social practice. It's not just about how they saw the transition, but what they did, what the Spanish citizens did during those years of change. No? And I really appreciate the way Ana reads these moments and these artifacts, because you have, during those same years, kind of an underground opposition and criticism to the regime that could not be voiced openly because of censorship, but was there, and if we read carefully, we can see it, no? And also because it takes us beyond the image of the Spanish miracle, right? This period of rapid economic growth during the 60s. What is behind that economic transformation? The key to the synthesis of all those products and their meaning, according to Ana, is the interplay of providence and chance, of grace and neglect. That is common to all those artifacts. Each one of them reflects the ways in which these ideas play. As she said, these ideas also reflect different notions of the future. And as such, as I said, they shape the way we behave, or the people behave, and I think that's a central contribution of the book. There's, as I mentioned, a deep tension in the background of all the interpretations that we see in the different chapters. No? On the one hand, the regime maintained the idea of a Spanish particularity of modernization, shaped by religious ideologies. And she talks about a political theology, right? In other words, something that is shaped by religious ideas, but is also used politically. On the other hand, what I mentioned, this subterranean sense of dissent that was fueled by the Civil War, its repressive aftermath, and the authoritarian violence that accompanied the regime throughout its span. Exile was a product of that tension, but literally exiled beyond the borders of Spain, but also within, the creation of these islands where people could live and produce culture in coded ways, but surviving nevertheless. Something that the book does very well is contextualize these cultural artifacts. The most important part of the setting, as mentioned, is the shift from an idea of autarchy in the political regime of the political economy of the regime to a modernization, a sense of becoming part of the modern world, economically, but also culturally. This coincides with a transition from diplomatic isolation post-Civil War to a close partnership with the US centered on defense resources. another part of the context that runs parallel to these two ideas is the development of a consumer culture that was a product of economic growth, but took a specific characteristics that Ana describes very well. I would say also an additional element here is the tensions within the Catholic theology that starting from this, early Falangista moment, shifts into a technocratic idea of technocratic management that had to reject the individualism of modern liberalism, but had to embrace the managerial ethos of Protestantism. So they were imposed or managed through the influence of the Opus Dei and other networks, religious organizations that combine devotion and service, traditional values and modern management ideas. This is there, and it's very important to understand what these cultural products do. We also see during these decades, we see censorship and the expulsion of creators to the return of some of them with pseudonyms. They publish sci-fi novels, and some of them openly, like Buñuel. There's a cycle there that is very interesting. The regime is not always the same. I really appreciate the way in which the book shows the contingency of any interpretation about these cultural products. The UFOs, they appear everywhere. They're in Argentina, in Mexico, in the US, and they meant a different thing. They were the same. They looked the same. They did the same things, but they were interpreted in totally different ways. In Spain, they could convey a religious, message, which could be apocalyptic, but also redeeming. They had the advantage that they could not be censored. UFOs was not the object of Franquista censorship because what did it mean, right? So it could be used to say different things, right? And they were discussed by a broad public, from people in the countryside to urban, intellectuals. They were also, and this fueled that nascent public sphere by the secrecy of the regime regarding UFOs, but also the changes that were happening in terms of the relationship with the US and the military bases. So I really appreciate this. Ana talks about what happened when the US created all these air bases and started moving atomic bombs around, sometimes dropping them. How do you make sense of that? The UFOs are very useful because they're these entities that don't care about national sovereignty, that fly, that might be apocalyptic, but they also might save us. So they kind of make sense. This idea. The word cielo, I think, is very useful to understand what was going on. It means the sky, it's space, but also heaven, right? It's something that was connected in many ways, and the UFOs were, crossing all those spaces. I have a lot more to say about science fiction. I really, enjoy that chapter of the book. Again, it couldn't be censored in the same way that other kinds of literature were, and it allowed other, some writers to use, English-sounding pseudonyms. Science fiction was also useful because it was used as a parody of modernization. You could write a serious, sci-fi radio play or a novel, but you can also make, fun. There's some very nice illustrations of how, there's a Spanish version of high tech, that, I don't know if you have that picture, but it's really good. It's a parody of the genre. And finally, Bruno, I think, discussed this very well, right? How chance, the lottery, was a way not only to make sense of capitalism, of the circulation of money, but also of, the lack of control that we have as economic actors over what happens with the money, right? There's an element of, contingency, of luck in capitalism, and the lottery was the best way to express it. But also a way to express the desire for social mobility. The idea that one could be redeemed by a stroke of luck. And in this regard, the lottery and chance were ways to talk about providence and its role in Spain. Franco kept saying, right? I mean, the providence of God will protect us, right? I mean, we have a program, but, God is also, supporting us. So that, sounds really incoherent today, but it makes sense if we look at all the cultural artifacts that Ana has analyzed in the book. I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. Anita?
Yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you. One point of departure for Ana's book is an international treaty with a great deal of contemporary relevance. In 1953, the 1953 Pact of Madrid, a bilateral agreement between the Franco government and the Eisenhower administration, which exchanged economic aid for the positioning of new military bases on Spanish soil, together with the realignment of Spain within the Western Axis. The agreement itself, the accompanying political and media discourses, and the recasting of the collective national imaginaries that it ensued has present-day resonance in April 2024, a month in which NATO commemorates its 75th anniversary and in which the Spanish government is reported to have opened a naval base for the NATO fleet in the port of Mahón on the Balearic island of Menorca. This will be the third such base after those of Rota and Cartagena, which came as part of the package of 1953. To choose the Pact of Madrid as a departure point is also significant at a time when military and diplomatic tensions between NATO and Russia seem to have reached their highest peak since the end of the Cold War. A vast corpus of scholarship, of course, has dealt with Franco's military agreements with the US, the Spanish naval bases, and the controversial incorporation into NATO. The work of many comes immediately to mind. But that research has largely been undertaken from a historical, military, and political science approach. In Fables of Development, we have instead a cultural studies sustained inquiry that focuses simultaneously on public imaginaries, collective constructions of fear, flying saucers, science fiction, comic books, the role of the radio, and the tensions between a push for consumerism and the frustrations of an impoverished majority whose hopes for social mobility lay in games of chance. These fables begin at a liminal moment, a historical juncture marked by the first attempts at the industrialization and liberalization of the economy. Spain, in the 1950s, was transitioning from the autarchic policies of the post-Civil War to a dependency model whose economic designs were to be drafted by emerging global financial institutions, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. It is in the tension between the central authority of the regime and its agents on the one hand, and the dependency on foreign aid and alliances on the other, that the four fables of development of this book emerge. Ana aptly analyzes them as a discursive, interpretative, and collective imaginaries at the crossroads of fabulae, in its Latin meaning, and contingent needs, the staging of Fables of Capital, as she describes. The repressive, ultranationalist politics of the first Francoist decade were gradually being replaced by a more technocratic but still reactionary political class, solidly anchored in an anti-communist agenda. The presence of the Opus Dei in key cabinet positions, explored in chapter 2 of the book, and the genealogy of capital accumulation in parallel with developmentalist agendas that lacked any social welfare program is revealingly traced in multiple suggestive ways. Ana's book aptly examines the collective and community responses that emerged, including through deviant artistic manifestations, bypassing the official system. Fables of Development states its commitment to work with interdisciplinary archives. It unlocks unusual and inspiring archival sources in written and especially in non-written form, engaging with popular beliefs, myths, visions, illusions, and their manifestations in literary texts, films, newsreels, comic books, radio programs, and newspapers. It was interesting to see the reiterated attention to one of the local newspapers that served as a mouthpiece of the Francoist regime, the starkly entitled Imperio Diario de Zamora de Falange Española de las Jons. To my knowledge, this source has not been rigorously studied before. It had close connections to the regime's colonial enterprises in Africa, the Protectorate of Morocco up to 1958, Spanish Sahara, and the Spanish territories on the Gulf of Guinea, all of which constituted important political and economic pillars of the dictatorship and of its developmentalist agenda. Fables of Development also examines what Ana calls the unexplored corpus of cultural objects and social practices. The presence of UFOs in public imaginaries and the press, the proliferation of games of chance, the national lottery, the cupón de ciegos, and the quinielas, as well as multitude of raffles and contests. It taps into ephemeral, informal archives, entering the realm of archaeology and ethnography of the everyday. The book rightly acknowledges the importance of the rural exodus of the 1950s, a process not entirely dissimilar to those simultaneously occurring in Latin American countries such as Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico. As in these other cases, this was an unevenly distributed phenomenon within the Spanish state, more central to Andalusia or Extremadura, for instance, than to Galicia or Asturias. A concurrent trend was external migration. Spain saw an unprecedented migratory exodus between 1957 and 1963, especially from the ports of A Coruña, Vigo, Cádiz, and the Canary Islands. Emigration was tightly controlled during the 1940s under the pretext of encouraging the birth rate and facilitating social reconstruction. In 1956, the migration legislation was revised, including through the creation of the Instituto Español de Migración. In the spirit of expanding the conversation, I would like to raise a number of considerations that build on Ana's own compelling analysis. What role, if any, might this migratory wave, I mean the external migration, have had in the construction of public imaginaries and in some of the popular media and cultural artifacts under analysis in this book? what was the massive expansion of gambling in the 1950s and 60s, and the proliferation of a culture of charity was the massive expansion of gambling in the 1950s and 60s, and the proliferation of a culture of charity, the option of the poor, an alternative to migration and remittances, and to the implicit hope of wealth that the migratory experience might have implied. What might have been the role of literacy campaigns in the fables of development you have identified? The Junta Nacional contra el Alfabetismo, created in 1950, claims to have reduced the literacy gap by 20% in the 2 decades that you study in your book. The book engages with some of the more ideologically charged aspects of the politics embedded in these fables of development. Its providentialism, its paternalism, and its biopolitical dimension. The status of childhood and orphanhood, for instance, as explored in chapter 4. This biopolitical aspect is particularly interesting. It serves as a natural entry point for the discussion of other territorialities of the developmentalist Spanish project, specifically the African colonies, as sites from which much of this developmentalism unfolded. And finally, unrelatedly, I wonder if you might want to comment on the way in which colonial modes of exploitation, initially designed for the African territories, were transposed into the Spanish national territory. I am thinking of the role of the Instituto Nacional de Colonización, a post-Civil War organism dependent on the Ministry of Agriculture, entrusted with reactivating the Spanish economy through the agricultural sector, which aimed to maximize productivity through enforced processes of expropriation and redistribution of land. This is an issue that Elena Miguelez Carballeira has tackled in her book, Postcolonial Spain, and Felix Zamora in his recent doctoral thesis. It is closely related to the expansive hydraulic projects, ditches, swamps, and canals that the Francoist regime embarked on during this period, and that I think Ana is now addressing in a new project on land and water. As Ana's book implies, nothing began or ended with the developmentalist projects of the 1950s and 60s. We need to subtract from the dictatorship that category of exceptionality on which a great deal of the scholarship on this period relied. Congratulations on this very thought-provoking and well-crafted monograph.
Thank you very much for these very thoughtful and generous comments and questions. So Ana, now it's your turn if you want to respond and to...
Well, thank you very much for your illuminating and very, very generous comments. It is an honor for me to be here today. So I will try to answer some of your comments and also make any reflections. Thank you, Benita, for your questions. In particular, all these ideas about the inner colonization of Spain and these projects of hydro-modernity of the Francoist regime. These topics were part of my dissertation. And I have to leave them behind because it was too much. I have a very ambitious project for my dissertation, like production, circulation, and distribution of capital. But at the end, I have to put this part of the production for the next project in order to understand the continuities and discontinuities of this project of land reform that was like displaced for this hydro modernity utopia that was part of a liberal project. But thank you very much for this question. And also, it is really important, this question of immigration. This week I was reading some information that I didn't know. On November 1970, 10% of the Spanish population was living abroad. So this is a very important point to consider in my analysis in the future, because I didn't know that it was like too high. And also the question of literacy. I mean, I am first college generation, so in this book I was trying to understand the generation of my parents, the social hopes, the dreams, the fears that my generation, that was part of some years of this social pact of Fordism, that our parents transmitted to us. But I also was raised by my grandparents, and they were peasants. My grandfather was a shepherd. So I was trying to understand this transformation in our countries from these peasant cultures, these rural cultures, to this, to current neoliberalism. So in the book, I mentioned a quote by Margaret Thatcher that it's really impressive. Like, economics are the method. The objective is to change hearts and souls. So my questions in this book was related to this quote. What happened? What is the nature of capitalism in the 20th century to change these hearts and souls? And I think that the continuities of these fables of development today, not only in Spain, but also in other regions, I keep wondering about how all these questions about chance, providence, how we imagine the circulation of capital. For example, in Spain, we have a problem with gambling in young generations, but we have to think about chance in a society in which people don't have opportunities. Some people describe like a bet is the CV of the people that has nothing to lose and nothing to win. So in this sense, gambling can be understood as a more complex activity for our societies. Is a problem, but at the same time, if young people don't have opportunities, they are going to deposit their social hopes in gambling, in chance, in other ways of financing that are also based on magical thought. I mean, all these kind of cryptocurrencies and financing processes that can be considered that are part of these practices related to providence and to chance. In this sense, I hope that my book can shed some light to understand our own collective fantasies of neoliberal economy, and I also try to think this this case study connected with other regions. I mean, the case of Mexico, the case of Brazil, the case of Chile, the case of Argentina are really important because they develop their own ideas about development. I wish I have more time to read more texts about dependency theories, theories of modernization in Latin America. I read something, but I want to read more. And also, for example, in the case of Opus Dei as a Hispanic project, I mean, the circulation of ideas and people, and this spiritualized Catholic neoliberalism that at the same time is against the social doctrine of the Catholic Church, which is real interesting. It's tried to, in the case of Spain, Ramiro de Maeztu was reading Max Weber, so he tries to capture these ideas of the Protestant ethic to create Hispanic and Catholic capitalism. And then the Opus Dei founder, José María Escrivá, was reading this text and tried to make this organization that is not only in Spain, but is working in other countries. So yeah, I hope that I can bring to the table ideas that can help us to understand our dreams, what we are dreaming, what the new generations are dreaming, because analyzing these fantasies and these dreams, I think, at least for me, is the most interesting part of my job, and have conversations with the students and colleagues about this. So thank you very much for all your comments.
Thank you, Ana. So the floor is open to questions. Yes.
Ooh. Gracias, Ana. Thank you so much, and congratulations. Something that caught my attention from the very beginning of your presentation was the title of your book alongside the photo that you chose for the cover, which was, as I understand, the inspiration for the project itself. The title, in the sense of development of the child, of the youngest generation that exists in any nation state, and also the implications of your choice of the word fable, because fable has, in a sense, like a didactic function here, something that is through the force of a moralizing lesson, something that's used to instill in children in this youngest generation a sense of the prevailing narrative that's being put forth. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts about why the term fable was really encompasses a whole host of cultural artifacts, and not just the literary in this case. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Emily, for your question. The title came to me in different ways. I take my notes writing with my hand. So suddenly I realized that the word fable was in every notebook in different places. Fable is a word that some authors are using during this period. For example, Antonio Boro Vallejo has a play, La Fundación, and the title is Fable in Two Parts. So he's thinking about his fiction as a fable. Also, Juan Marcé is using the verb fabular. His characters fabulan, tell stories, historias inventadas que ellos crean, these aventis, these these stories. Then I read a book about titled Fables of Abundance. The author is T.S. Lear. Yeah. He's a professor at Rutgers University, and it is a cultural history of advertising in the United States. So my first project of the dissertation was a dissertation about consumerism and advertising, and so I read this book. But then I found this picture of the cover, and I changed the object of the study completely. And this is why I believe in working with archives, because the archives are always giving you a lot of surprises. And then I read this book of Jacques Derrida, The Beast and the Sovereign, La Bestia y el Soberano. And he has a wonderful reflection about the role of fables in society. And also Michel de Certeau has an explanation of advertising as a fable, as a fable and as a providential narrative. So yeah, I decided that I have to think about what fables, what narrative structures, what myths, what fantasies can be analyzed, and then the notion of fable was essential to develop these ideas. Thank you.
I have a comment, I have a question. To follow up on Bruno's larger claim about your book, that it can be instrumental to rethink the Catholic origins of capitalism. Now, Spanish and Iberian Catholicism played a key role in early modern capitalism, and in the Americas, in Asia, and Africa. And I mean, let's just remind how the institution of the encomienda was precisely presented, and now the forced labor, indigenous forced labor, was presented as an indispensable way to enter the Christian and then Catholic protection, no? Encomendados a. So I was just wondering how Franco's Fables of Development, how can we think Franco's Fables of Development vis-a-vis colonialist Spain, and in particular Catholic colonialism and colonial capitalism of early modern times?
Yeah, thank you very much for this interesting question. Yeah, Franco's project was a colonial one. There were no colonies, but still this imperial longing. And also one interesting thing, I found an essay that was essential for me. Is by historian Bartolomé Clavero, and the title is Antidora. It's an essay about the Catholic anthropology of modern economy. And it's a reflection about the role of charity and the role of this Antidora countergift in Catholic economies. So in the case of Francoism, we have this like kind of colonial project for rural communities, but also the idea that the population are not citizens. The population are national Catholic subjects that has to be redeemed. So this is related to this idea of imperial thought about the subjects. Population are not citizens; they have no social rights. They are the nation is you have to be Catholic in order to be a
they are
citizen.
encomendados.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that it is really interesting to think about the continuities and discontinuities of these notions of the colonial project in the 20th century. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ana. Would you care to speak more about what specifically inspired you to write the book? Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that I think this book is an autobiographical project because I try to understand who I am in terms of the history of my family. I try to understand who were my parents, who were my grandparents, how my grandparents lived in a small village with no electricity, and now I can teach here in this university. So this is there is a huge this is a huge transformation in 3 generations. So this is not autofiction, but it at some point is an analysis of the history of my family and my own identity, and yeah, collective identity. And it inspired. One of my inspirations is to talk to other people. I love to talk to other people. I love conversations. So I thought that this project can give me wonderful conversations with other people. Thank you.
Oh, hello. My name is Hector. I'm really looking forward to reading this book. Two things that really caught my attention is the first one coming. I'm from Puerto Rico, and part of the narratives of colonialism a lot of the times is that it's a country that doesn't know its history, and part of perhaps there's a layer of an insular layer to it that's sometimes there's not a vocabulary to think about that in relation to other countries, or thinking Spanish as a colonial power who also has the trauma of its own, and in relationship to the rest of Latin America throughout this period. Particularly culturally, since you were speaking about the cultural products, there is this relationship, and there are countries in Latin America that are exporting cultural products to Spain, and perhaps there's more of a cultural dependency in cases, and it's a really interesting topic that I've been interested in, particularly in regards to music, so. It's an aspect that I really caught my attention about it. And the question I had about the capitalism Catholic connection, I don't know if there's something about the iconography of it. In my experience, I think that in Puerto Rico, there's kind of a debate between the Protestant and the Catholic Church. And although, as you mentioned, the Catholic Church is obviously an emblem of the colonialism and the early capitalism, perhaps because of the syncretism aspect of it and its connections to Santeria and the Caribbean and all these things, it sometimes, in Puerto Rico, for example, it is also the church of nationalism versus the Protestant church being the church of statehood and conservative politics. In the U.S., and I know that in Spain, throughout the Movida coming out of a period, artists, most famously Almodovar, also used the Catholic iconography and kind of reclaimed it and used similar ideas to really make it their own. And so I was wondering if there's a part of the Catholic, something that's particular to Catholicism that detaches the religiosity from the culture, and that culture kind of lingers on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your questions. One thing that the archives give to you is information that is really surprising. For example, in 1969, there was a survey in the national clergy in Spain between priests and nuns. And 47% of the priests in 1979 in Spain declared themselves that they were socialist. So this is the kind of information that is like, well, the Catholic Church is not this institution. Well, it's a very contradictory institution. And at the same time, in the 60s and 70s, a lot of people make this transition or join together Marxism and Catholicism. And some Catholic institutions serve as spaces in which Marxist groups can join and can explore new methodologies and new and can read and can discuss ideas. Also, popular religiosity is really important. In this case, for example, there was another surprising fact. These sightings of UFOs, the peak was at the same time as Marian apparitions, like Martian and Marian apparitions at the same time. So in some villages, these Marian apparitions were part of like conversion dramas of Republicans, of anti-Franco people that wanted to show that they were Catholic. I mean, I was Republican, but now I am Catholic. So this is part also of these popular practices in order to avoid the repression. So yeah, I mean, it is really complex to understand also Catholic Church as an institution that is changing. It's not the same, the Catholic Church in the 40s connected to the dictatorship, and then the Catholic Church in the transformation of the Second Vatican Council, for example, that was trying to find new ways to help people and to reclaim social justice. So when we talk about religion, or when we talk about the Catholic Church as an institution, this is like a field of forces. I mean, you can find contradictions all the time, and you can find different social uses of these ideas and spaces. Thank you.
Seth?
There's this article that I love by a guy named Stephen Justice, who the title of the article is, "Did the Middle Ages Believe in Their Miracles?" And he's pushing back against this idea that pre-modern people were just superstitious, gullible, believed any old apparition that came their way. So my question for you is, do you think that the neoliberal boosters who are celebrating the economic miracles of the various geographies that have come up, Spain, Chile, Brazil, do they believe in their miracle or not?
Wow. Thank you for your question. I can give you an example. When I was writing the dissertation, we have a government in Spain of the Partido Popular, the Conservative Party, and there was a minister that in an interview in a newspaper declared that he had an guardian angel that helped him to park, to find things. That was a friend. And this was a minister of the government of Spain. So I don't know if these people believe or not in miracles or the guardian angel or another minister, the Minister of Employment, when the numbers of employment were really high, she told the journalist that I am going to pray to the Virgin to help this situation. So I don't know if these people believe in miracles or divinity or not, but what I know is that people were making decisions about our lives. And this idea that, as you mentioned, the Opus Dei they are a specialist in this like business as theology. I don't know how to describe. He developed a really sophisticated methods that now we can find in business schools. So, for example, in Spain, the University of Navarra, the schools of business, they are managed by Opus Dei agents. So, yeah, they are still there. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Anna, so much for the book and thank you, everyone, for the presentation. I wanted to invite you to talk a bit about the archival choices. Which archives you decided to ignore, or how did you prioritize when compared to other previous books and that you mentioned? And then I don't know if there's time, but I had a second question about the perspectives. So the front cover of the image has an odd kind of use of perspective. And then the Renal in España y La Paz, that also has quite, he's playing with a lot of different use of perspective. And then it got me thinking about the comic books and the films you mentioned. So how did you think about, it also made me think of the use of facades in some of Berlanga's films, but how did you think about perspective and the visual side in the book? Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Ameya. Well, I am really fan of archives. And I try to, if you try to explain a historical juncture, in my opinion, you have to see as many things as possible. You have to watch films, you have to see photographies, you have to read literature, because you are going to find connections between these, as Bruno mentioned, forms of the real, the poetic of social forms. If you want to understand how ideology is crystallized in forms, you have to go to different, this is how I work. I go to different archives, and then I classify these forms in very strange ways. I don't know if I am following Walter Benjamin's ideas of how to deal with archives, with different types of archives. And I also try to go to popular culture archives and ephemeral archives. For example, comic books for children that were very difficult to find gave me a lot of information, because during a lot of years there was no censorship for comic books for children, and the authors were anti-Franco artists. So if you can find this ephemeral archives in which cultural agents are expanding the imagination, you are going to find a lot of information of this period. And then I wanted to put together popular culture archives with, for example, Buñuel's Viridiana, at the same level, because this is the way I try to make these connections. I also wanted to work with canonical films or novels to find new meanings for these works. Thank you.
Alberto?
Thank you, Ana, for this wonderful book. It was such a pleasure to read it. So I was wondering about something that maybe is so obvious and so ubiquitous in your book that it doesn't need to be explicit, and it's the circulation of affect in your book. Where's the role of affect? Because on the one hand, you have a state that does not only repress or kill, it tells beautiful and enchanting stories. It's a very seductive state. And it creates love in a way. But on the other hand, is kind of, because your book has this interesting structure that it exposes an essential ambivalence of storytelling, because storytelling, on the one hand, is the seduction of the state, and on the other hand, is a means of survival. But what I wonder is the point of continuity between those two things, because you really see these things. I mean, because people, the absence of a state that doesn't want to deal with welfare, all that, is filled by beautiful stories. And those beautiful stories help the state in a way. So I wonder that, how that point of continuity between the storytelling of the state and the storytelling of the resistance works. And also the other side of affect. I mean, you have talked about this a little bit, but this book is a treasure box in a way. I mean, it's so beautiful. I mean, the materiality of the book is the collector. I mean, the love of the collector. And I wonder, how did you deal with that? I mean, how do you politicize that love of the collector? I mean, that, again, the incredible materiality, the pleasure of the book. I mean, how do you, go beyond that love of the object?
Thank you so much. Well, this is a very difficult question because, I think that I wrote this book, part of the objective was to try to tell stories that I didn't find in other books about Francoism. I mean, I read a lot of social history, and it's an amazing work that historians are doing, but most of the time, analysis about the dictatorship are based on repression and the violence of the state and memory and a very the dictatorship was a tragedy, but at the same time, I wanted to find the cultural creators. I mean, the people that continue with this work of imagination, all these writers, all these cartoonists, all these people that try to not only to survive, but also to continue with artistic and cultural work, in some cases with a continuity of the work that they were doing during the Second Republic. So, I mean, that part of the book is also a celebration of these authors, of this work of imagination and dignity. And I try to include also essays and chronicles of people that were reflecting. For example, if you read Manuel Vázquez Montalbán, Crónica Sentimental, that was written in prison, it was not a dramatic book. It's a book full of life, written in prison, about the popular culture of the period. So maybe at some point I try to celebrate too much, I don't know. But I think that it was one of the difficult parts of the book, how these anti-Franco authors live under the same ideological coordinates than the fascist authors. So they have the same elements, they have the same narratives, but how anti-Franco authors try to interrupt, displace, distort these narratives in order to find alternative meanings, alternative communities. For example, in the case of gambling, like there are a lot of stories in which prizes are losses and losses are new rewards. So the price of winning the lottery is not winning the lottery, it's new relationships that you make with your neighbors, with your friends, with people that you don't know. So I think that I was trying to make this. I mean, if we think on neoliberalism, we are neoliberals. We live under neoliberalism, but what we do with these fantasies, with these social imaginaries, with these social hopes is what had to challenge us, because we live under the same ideological umbrella. So this was part of the project, like to vindicate the aesthetic, political, and ethic decisions of anti-Franco creators.
Thank you. These sound like an excellent way to close a wonderful event. Thank you, Ana, for these wonderful words, final words, and to all the speakers for your interventions and to the questions and to the audience. So the book is also here on sale, and there is book signing, I imagine. Are you available to sign some books? So, and we continue in a formal way with the reception. Thank you very much.